let me move into our 10 misguided notions of teaching and learning that impede the use of empirically supported tactics and hinder the effectiveness of special education. Number 1, structured curriculum, structured instruction, right, scripted programming is bad, that it impedes true learning. Right? The idea that explicit, direct, and teacher-controlled is bad because it actually flies in the face of what's in vogue and has been for a while, which is more of a discovery-based learning, where this teacher is not the sage on the stage, but the guide by the side, and they're just supposed to arrange the environment so that kids can figure things out, right? You can also call that inquiry-based instruction. And again, this all occurs on a continuum, and all inquiry-based isn't necessarily going to be effective. And all teacher-directed isn't going to be effective. The reality is usually somewhere in the middle, right? Whenever there are extremes, the reality is somewhere in the middle. But our educational pendulum right now, from preschool to university, has clearly swung towards the discovery, inquiry-based learning. And as a result, teachers are taught that structured programs are bad because you shouldn't be in there actually structuring and directing what the students will learn. That will interfere with their true learning. They should be able to discover for themselves. The problem is that students need basic fundamental knowledge and the academic tools associated with that in order to manipulate information in the context of discovery-based learning or inquiry. And that kind of makes sense that if you, for example, I think about an organization like Google, and you see images of the Google workplace where it's not structured, it's not dictatorial, it's very unconventional, it's very free-flowing. They want to encourage innovation, right? Innovation is a type of inquiry-based learning and discovery. That's great, except all of those computer programmers who arrive there and get hired, they didn't discover how to do computer programming and calculus and algebra on their own. They were explicitly taught so that they have these base skills. And when you have the base skills, then you can apply them in a more functional way, right? As opposed to the opposite of that, where you just kind of figure everything out from the get-go. That actually defeats the purpose of school, which is not to allow or to just expect every student to rediscover the knowledge base of humanity, but actually it is desirable and functional to explicitly teach things that we want everyone to know and be good at before they come into, before we're challenging them with being inquiry-based and discovery-based. This actually reminds me of when my son went into grade 8, which is the first year of high school in his local high school. There was a parent orientation day. All the parents got to go around with their grade 8 student and visit all the classes, hear from the teachers. And I'll never forget, we went into the math class and the math teacher looked a little bit grumpy, all these incoming grade 8s and their parents. And he said, okay, mums and dads, don't ever let your kid come to school. Don't ever let your student come to my class without a calculator. And of course, one brave parent put up their hand and said, why? And the poor teacher almost tore her head off. He was very passionate. He said, because none of them know how their multiplication tables. None of them know, they're still counting on their fingers, right? This is a teacher who's seeing that in the absence of direct teaching of specific skills, right? If you're allowed to just kind of play with math and figure it out, you lack the fundamentals, and then at later grades, that becomes problematic. And so people are recognizing this even within the educational system. It makes sense to teach certain things like basic addition and multiplication and I'll talk about rote memory, because it's practical, it's functional, it allows you to apply that in a more sophisticated way. The two variables that have produced the most reliable and robust correlations with student achievement are the amount of curriculum covered, right? That's learning opportunities, and students' active engagement with that content, right? That is, we call that active student responding, and that is very consistent with the more learn units you have, the more contact with the antecedents, the opportunity to respond, the greater the learning. And teachers in terms of how to design and deliver instruction for generalization and maintenance. Optimizing both of these outcomes requires teachers to control the selection and delivery of instructional content. So it's okay to have very structured teacher-directed lessons, and it's okay to have discovery-based inquiry if the fundamental skills are already there. No empirical evidence has shown that structured curriculum and teacher-led instruction lead to any of the negative outcomes asserted by advocates of child-centered so-called progressive education. To the contrary, research has found that academic achievement by students enrolled in child-centered progressive curriculum lags behind that of students in schools with clear-cut curriculum outcomes and expectations. So structure is not bad. It is a faulty notion. Number two, teaching discrete skills trivializes education and ignores the whole child. And the big idea here is if you take a skill and you task analyze it down into the component and you just teach the component, that is somehow trivializing. You need to always be teaching the whole big idea. So the faulty notion is that targeting and isolating specific skills renders them trivial. And I've certainly seen, if we're working on, let's say, imitation with a child with autism, we're having them copy me, touch head, clap hands, people might look at that and go, that seems very trivial. Like, why are you doing that? That's decontextualized. And the reality is, we are not doing this as an endpoint in and of itself. We are doing this because we know we are then scaffolding this back into a larger functional repertoire for the student. But they need this specific instruction to get there. So this notion also rests on the belief that teaching specific skills is a form of reductionism that ignores or disregards the whole child. It is said that the whole of anything, for example, reading, is more than the sum of its parts, for example, decoding or phonics skills. And although the component skills may be isolated for instruction, it's neither useful nor wise to do so. The science of teaching literacy, there we go, literacy is the word I'm looking for, actually tells you the opposite. If you screen a kindergarten student or a grade 1 student that is lacking basic phonetics, right? They can't sound out a constant vowel consonant combination. You can decontextualize that and teach them that skill and then fold that back into their oral reading fluency and context and move them forward, right? So it is very appropriate in some areas to take a skill out of the composite and just work on the component. The goal of instruction, as I've said multiple times now, is generalization and application and maintenance over time. And that skill can be taught in a decontextualized manner or it can be taught as part of the whole. It doesn't matter as long as you achieve that desired outcome. Either way, you do need to achieve it to fluency, which I described earlier, is you achieve acquisition and accuracy, and then you add on speed, and speed leads to automaticity so that you can do things without thinking, because that is professional performance, and that allows you then to scaffold into more sophisticated repertoires. So the ultimate assessment of value is whether the skills benefit the learner's overall repertoire. Number three, this is a big one, drill and practice limits students' deep understanding and dulls creativity. So the faulty notion is that doing drill and practice repetition is bad, sometimes referred to lovingly as drill and kill. And it is possible to drill and kill something. But on the other hand, if it's something like multiplication tables, as we've already established, doing that repeated practice leads to acquisition and fluency and competency, then that allows the student then to move on to other things. And so it's clearly not bad. The faulty notion is also that if you do drill and kill, you're doing rote learning, right? That's rote memorization. Rote has become a 4-letter word in the halls of education. But here's a great question. Who is so high and mighty that determined that memorization is bad? Because arguably, memorization for many things is very good. There's a lot of stuff that you know and that I know that we've memorized, and that allows us to perform competently in society. And if we hadn't memorized it, we would be at a disadvantage. And so memorization gets a bad name. The idea is that you need to understand something, and I understand the converse idea, right? That you need to understand with more depth. But there are some things that if you know the fundamentals rote, it allows you to achieve the depth, right? So rote, the word most frequently used to demean the outcomes of drill and practice, means to do something in a manner, in a routine or fixed way, to respond automatically by memory alone without thought. That's not always bad. Right? I've already established it's good to know many things. For example, I think about professional programs. I've talked to some colleagues I know who are medical doctors who will say a lot of medical school was rote learning because they need to memorize the limbic system and they need to memorize the endocrine system so that they're not struggling with that they haven't memorized it when they need to treat a patient, right? The treatment of the patient is the application where you do need to be flexible and potentially creative and innovate, but you can't be if you don't have the base knowledge. Similarly, when I teach my university students to prepare for their certification exam, I always stress your base is memorizing definitions, because once you memorize definitions, then you can move on to the application of those definitions, right? And that's where you see that higher order learning is in the application. So memorization gets a bad rap. Here's a reconceptualization. Memorizing foundational skills and knowledge allows the learner to apply that knowledge more effectively to more sophisticated problems. And the purpose of drills is not to drill and kill, it's to achieve competency, that fluency, accuracy, and speed. Fluent makes life easier. The things that we are all good at and we can do without thinking, we are fluent at, and that's often through a lot of practice. For example, fluency with basic operations in math makes solving long division easier. You don't have to stop and think about the component skills because they're already firmly in your repertoire. That allows you to deal with more sophisticated problems. There's also the issue of it dulling creativity. Here's the quote here. Today's teachers are also told that drill and practice dulls students' creativity. That's why it's bad. In fact, repeated practice leads to increased competence and confidence with the subject matter or skills being practiced, thereby providing students with the knowledge and tools with which they can be creative. And to address the creativity, with my daughter's permission, here's some of her artwork. My daughter's a pretty good artist by my estimation, not just parent pride speaking. She's constantly doodling and drawing. Here's a picture of an actress, I think, and a Shrek card she was making for a friend who didn't feel well. I just find these things around my home from time to time, and I take pictures now and then. This is an example of creativity. Well, guess what? She didn't just spontaneously come into the world able to draw this way. She has, in isolation, drawn hundreds, if not thousands of eyeballs, just eyeballs, drill and practice eyeballs, and noses and lips and chins and ears and hair and faces in isolation before she put them together. And now you see her work. She is extremely fluent. She's extremely competent. She's extremely creative. That is the result of repetition and drilled practice. Right? It didn't dull her creativity, it allowed her to be creative. I'm not possible to express creativity. I can't express creativity through drawing because I don't have the foundational skills. I haven't had that drill and practice with them, right? So I can't draw like that. So the desired outcome, of course, is that we have active self-directed learners, no question. The more solid those foundational skills, the more you are preparing students to achieve this outcome. So don't shy away from rote learning for things where it makes sense to teach it. But don't overgeneralize expectations for students to discover everything or learn everything for themselves, because that is grossly inefficient to need to do that. Now, as I said earlier, drill and practice can totally be done badly, poorly, that results in killing kids' motivation. That's the drill and kill. But anything can be done badly. You need to understand why you would be doing this and the functional outcome of it. A meta-analysis is a study that looks at a whole bunch of other studies to get the big ideas. A meta-analysis of 85 intervention studies for students with disabilities found that regardless of the practical or theoretical orientation of the study, the largest effect sizes were obtained by interventions that included systematic drill, repetition, practice, and review. So the research shows that these things are not a problem. They are in fact good for students. And arguably for our students, even more so. Teachers don't need to measure student performance. The question of data. Direct, objective, frequent measurement of student performance is a hallmark of special education. We need to measure what we're doing to know if it's working, if we need to make changes and to be accountable for what we're doing. So direct means we see the student engaging in the behavior, the action, the verb. Objective means that we measure it in a standard way so that we can be sensitive to change over time. So with reading, for example, you might measure words correct per minute, words per minute, or math problems per minute. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of standard acceleration charting, which is arguably the single best standard unit of measurement. There are precision teachers in our community who are experts at that, but that's a whole workshop unto itself. And then frequent, you need to measure a lot in order to be sensitive to the effectiveness of teaching and behavior change. And I'm going to come back to those. 75% of surveyed special educators agree that it's important to frequently measure student learning towards their IEP goals, 75%, but 85% report that they never or seldom collected and charted student performance data to make instructional decisions. And you have to ask, well, if you agree with it, why don't you do it? Because it's hard to do. It's extra work to do. People are already busy. They've got a lot going on, but it is still necessary. And we'll get to the pragmatics and practicality of it tomorrow afternoon. There are some things that operate against data collection. The contingencies that require it are pretty weak, right? If you're going to collect data, you need to be able to look at it. People who are collecting the data want to know that someone's looking at it, making decisions with it, or they'll stop taking the data, right? If we don't expect data in IEPs, people won't collect data to be in IEPs. So that's kind of prefacing tomorrow. I'm going to skip that slide. Number 5, students must be internally motivated to really learn. The faulty notion is that external rewards that come from outside the skin, like praise or tokens and things like that, are ineffective for learning or even harmful. This is misinformation. This goes against everything that we know in behavior science. This misinformation, though, has been widely promoted in both passionate and very influential and articulate ways, despite the lack of empirical support. There are certain proponents of this faulty notion who are widely noted and cited, and when you read their work, you notice that what is lacking are scientific references that support the assertions being made. Research has shown substantial evidence that contingent teacher praise, approval, and other forms of positive reinforcement have positive effects on student behavior and achievement. And I don't need to say this to all the teachers in the room. In particular, I think of elementary school elementary teachers. Early elementary teachers. I remember when my daughter was in elementary school, from kindergarten to about grade 3 or 4, her teachers walked on water. Her teachers were gods. I could say something and she'd be like, yeah, but if Mrs. Cross said it, it was the word of Mrs. Cross. It was indisputable, it's fact. And the point is that teachers are influential, especially early on. We wish that would continue forever. But students are very sensitive to teacher praise, right? Those teachers know, they can see in the child's eyes, just a pat on the back or a kind word, acknowledgement, and the child lights up. So teachers know that the external rewards are positive. I think the misinformation is saying that, oh, well, then you're creating students who are just always seeking that approval, right? And that's artificial and that will harm learning. Well, really, for students who go on to probably achieve the most academic success, they are very responsive to those social reinforcers from their teachers and their parents early on, but then that does become automatically reinforced over time, where they are simply reinforced for seeing that high grade, and that is that so-called intrinsic motivation. But they're not now immune to social praise and external reinforcers. It's now a collection of reinforcement, right? Both external and internal, so to speak. In terms of the overall effects, I've got my 2-minute warning, all right. In terms of the overall effects of reward, our meta-analysis indicates no evidence of detrimental effects of reward on measures of intrinsic motivation. These findings are given more importance in light of the fact that group design experiments on rewards and intrinsic motivation were primarily designed to detect detrimental effects. The reward contingencies examined in this literature can be viewed as a subset of the many possible arrangements of the use of rewards in everyday life. What is clear at this time is that rewards do not inevitably have pervasive negative effects on intrinsic motivation. Nonetheless, the myth continues. And the author there is Dr. Judy Cameron, who's in education at the University of Alberta. This is Canadian research. She is like the person who talks about, known for researching intrinsic and extrinsic reinforcement. And her data, she makes that powerful. Academics tend to be very conservative in their language. That's not a conservative statement, right? There is no evidence, right? The myth continues. All right, do I have time to get through one more before we have lunch? One more? All right, we'll get through one more. Yeah, I can do one more. Bear with me, 2 minutes. And then we'll be close to where we need to be today. So number 6, faulty notion, is building students' self-esteem is the teacher's primary goal. Teachers' jobs is to build self-esteem. Well, children who are high achieving and successful and socially successful tend to have high self-esteem, which isn't a surprise. So this is the chicken and egg. Did their self-esteem enable them to achieve academic and social success, or did their academic and social success enable their high self-esteem? And arguably, kids who are effectively taught and develop competence become proud of themselves and demonstrate self-esteem because they are competent, and that competence is the outcome of teaching. Here's the last slide before we break. Those of you in the education system have probably not heard of Project FollowThrough. Project FollowThrough, I'm fascinated by this. It is the largest, longest, most expensive study ever conducted in the history of education, in the field of education in North America. It spanned from the 60s through the 80s at a cost of more than $1 billion, and those are US dollars back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what Project FollowThrough did is they evaluated a wide range of different curricular and instructional tactics to really try to find that which was the most effective in order for the American educational establishment to adopt it. And so they compared all of these curricula in the largest, longest, most expensive study in the history of North American education. And Project FollowThrough found that direct instruction, which is a structured, scripted curriculum that tells the teacher what to do, which goes back to faulty notion number 1. It is a behavior analytic derivative technology. It found that direct instruction model focused on improving children's reading, math, and language skills. It produced the highest scores on measures of self-concept, higher even than for programs designed to enhance self-concept. Is that shocking? That's not shocking to me, right? Effective instruction leads to kids who feel proud and comfortable and confident and ready to tackle new things, and that's going to manifest as self-esteem, right? So it's not so much chicken and egg to me.